At InDigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine, and as always, a big shout out to patrons. We got a couple new ones that came in the last couple days, so thank you so very much. And I am fresh back from the Michigan Public Safety Telecommunications Conference, and it was awesome. We'll be talking about that here in just a bit, but we're going to go ahead and jump right in with my guest. And my guest today, and we've been talking about this for a little while now, so I am very excited to have her on. Her name is Christa, and she is from Genesee County 911 out of Michigan.
Hi.
Hey, what is going on?
Oh, not a whole lot.
So this is going to be fun. Also, I am the voice of your calling tree.
Yes, you are. Very familiar with your voice. Called it a couple times.
Oh man, you know, it is funny because one of my friends, Megan from Allegan, her and I, we grew up together, and so we've known each other for years, from when we were little kids all the way to present time. And it's funny that we ended up working at the same dispatch center, same county that we grew up in Allegan County. And when a little bit after I did that recording, and I'm pretty sure it was for your county. If not, it was for Kalamazoo. But either way, it works the same. She ended up sending me a text message, and she goes, "You freaked me out today." And that's all the message said. And I was like, "What? Wait a minute. I haven't talked to you in a few months." And that's what she sent to me in a text message, is like, "You freaked me out today." I was like, "What did I do? What happened?" And she goes, "I was calling this center and I hear your voice, and I had to look at my phone to make sure I had called who I was calling because you're talking to me."
That's hilarious. Yeah. It's so funny because whenever we were going, people were getting ready for the conference, I was telling them to make sure they go, they went and listen to your session.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Who is he?" And I was like, he's our voice when you call in. That's who he is.
That's right. Yeah. You know, the casino night, your director was there with another person, and we were talking. I think Jim Marshall was standing next to me at the time, and she was talking to Jim and stuff, and she kind of looks at me, and we said hello. And I said, "By the way," I said, "I don't know if you know who I am." And she's just kind of smiling. And I said, "I'm the voice of your phone tree." And she started busting up, and she goes, "Yeah, you are."
Now that you say that, I can
Yes.
totally hear it.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, it was so funny because they would send me, and I haven't worked with in digital for over a year now, but every so often I'll do like a little bit of contract work here and there for them, and I haven't received something to update your calling tree yet, but for a little
It
while
must be
there,
working.
yeah, it must be working because there were a few times where I think I got changes like 3 or 4 times in a week. I'm like, is this what I'm supposed to say? Like, what do they want me to say? Like, for sure, what do they want me to say? So I had to write out a script, and then I went through and like, you've called Genesee County 911.
Yeah. I actually think it says you have reached Genesee
Oh,
County
you have
911.
reached. Ah, you're correct. Yes, you're right. Yeah, you have reached Genesee County 911. If this is an emergency, yeah, this is so stupid because so I recorded some bloopers once, and I was saying it, and I think I said something like, "You have reached. I have no idea what it is. I have to read this again," and I started swearing and shit, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to send this to my coworkers so that they can hear it because I always send it to them and then they upload it. And before I sent it though, I thought, I probably shouldn't do this because there was one time that I sent one over and they did not listen to it at all. And
Oh God.
yes, yeah, can you imagine if they had just
No.
went ahead and uploaded it and someone calls your center on a 10-digit line, a non-emergency, and they hear, "You've reached, I have no idea who it is that I'm supposed to be talking about." Shit. And just me swearing would
It's
have
the
been.
best open mic.
Yes, yeah, I would have been straight up fired right there. Well, maybe not fired. I would have gotten in trouble, but you guys would have gotten in trouble too.
Yeah, trust me, those citizens would not have let it last that long. They'd have been like,
Oh,
"Excuse me?"
yeah, exactly. So, we've known each other for a while here now, and we've seen each other back and forth at conferences and stuff, and I've wanted to have you on for a while. But recently we were both at the conference and stuff. You were doing some stuff there, and I wanted to get some feedback from you a little bit here on Imagine Listening, because it's hard to explain to people what it's like being in a room full of people who come from where you come from, and take these calls. They know exactly what it's like and what it feels like, that you're not just answering the phone, that you're there with the caller throughout the entire time. And you kind of mentioned how some of the calls, and I say this because we were talking about this before we started recording here, but you were talking about how it was kind of refreshing to hear different calls, because although some of those might not affect or impact you the same way, it's still good to hear them because you just get to learn more about.
Well, and I think too, it almost like solidifies. Like I think we've all had those moments in the center where we're like, "This call just tears me up. Why is nobody else feeling the same way about this call as I am?" So it's kind of refreshing to hear like all sorts of different stories. Like, well, that one didn't really affect me as much as the other one did. But then you're like, okay, but that call that I have didn't really affect anybody. So it's almost like it just like solidifies like your feelings sometimes. Like sometimes we have calls, and I always say it had like some of the craziest calls you take, or some of like the hardest calls you take, a lot have to do with like the season of life that you're in. Because like,
Right.
I mean, if you can somehow find where like these calls could somehow relate to you, it changes everything, because you're like, this could be me on the other end of the line. And I think sometimes we use that whenever we're taking calls, at least I do. Like you almost detach yourself from the call, and you're like, well, it's not me. It's not someone I know on the other end of the phone. And whenever it is somebody, it almost like rattles you to your core, because you're like, okay, these are actual people. This could be something that you're having to deal with the aftermath of. This is probably like a stupid call compared to the ones we always take, but like we had a really bad windstorm in Genesee County, and we were getting back to back phone calls. I mean, like there was like 20 in the queue. We couldn't like do anything. And I'm sitting next to one of my friends, and she's like, Christa, it's Mimi. And everybody at work calls my mom Mimi. And I was like, what? And I had somebody in my ear. I couldn't do anything. It was my mom, and it ended up being my brothers who it ended up being, but they had a tree fall on their power lines. And whenever it fell on their power lines, it ripped the wires out of my parents' house, and their electrical box had almost caught fire. And my brother was sleeping at home. He was like 17 or 18. And he worked nights, and he heard the loud pop. And when he went into the basement was like full of smoke. And so like, it was like I was actually leaving early that day. And when I went home, I had to deal with everything, but it was just like one of those moments where all of those calls I was taking, they seemed to mean a little more because one of them was my family members that called in. And so I think sometimes, it just, depending on what season of life you're going through, those calls just affect you. So seeing all of these different people taking these calls, some of them being really old calls they'd taken, some of them being really recent that maybe they were still processing, it was really refreshing to see and hear.
And listening to you to mention this story that you just shared right now, this is something also that if you get a similar call from a family who's calling in, you're able to call upon that experience to help that person a little more than someone who has never dealt with something like that before. I'm a firm believer that a lot of the stuff that we've dealt with, in our life, that life experience can help us in a lot of these different calls. I was having back issues for a long time, and a lady called saying that she was having the same issues, almost the exact same neck and back pain and stuff, but her pain was so bad that she wanted to commit suicide. And I told her what helped me, and it ended up helping her. So I was able to, get that from my own experience to help that person. And I feel like the same thing could be for you as well, or any other person.
Yeah, for sure. This one's not necessarily as serious. It's kind of funny, but when I started working at Genesee County, I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 5.5. And whenever I was going on a maternity leave, my doctor was like, she had wanted to put me off. I did not want to go off because I was like, I can't do that. I can't leave, I can't leave work yet. And so I wanted to work right up. Well, my feet had gotten so swollen that I was just like, I need to go off. Well, I had to see a fill-in doctor. And she was like, well, contrary to what most pregnant women think, being pregnant is not a disability and you can work until you have the baby. And I was like, so we were like going back and forth. So finally my doctor called. She's like, I don't know why she told you that. We're going to write you off. So as I'm waiting for the documents to come, to get faxed over to work so I could leave to go home that day for my first day of maternity leave, I take a phone call from this lady, and this poor thing had been sent home from the hospital. She was in labor. She was on the second story in an apartment complex, and they couldn't get in because the door was locked. And I remember she was in the middle of contractions. And as a pregnant woman who is about to go through this same exact thing, I remember thinking, we have mute switches at our 911, and I don't know if everybody has them or not, but we have our mute switch. And I turned around to our EMS dispatcher, who happened to be sitting behind me, and I muted myself, and I was like, you better get somebody in there right now. I said, I only plan on delivering one baby this week, and it ain't hers. And he started laughing. He's like, I'm doing what I can. And so she's like, ma'am, you don't understand. And I remember telling her, I was like, ma'am, I promise you, out of everyone in this 911 center, I understand the most. I promise you. I was just after that, because it was my first kid. I'm like, I'm not going through that. I'm not going through this.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to say, being your first one, and, you already have, before this call, you already have everything that you're doing to prepare, right? Whether it be, breathing classes or just anything like that to prepare for your first child. And then you take this phone call and you're listening to this person. And I'm sure you're probably thinking in the back of your head, as you are doing your most best work, as you would do, because you're a dispatcher, you're amazing at what you do, but in the back of your mind you're probably thinking, oh shit, is this what it's gonna be like for me?
Right. I was just like, oh my gosh. I was like, this can't happen. And I was like, what if the hospital sends me home? What if I think I'm in labor and I'm not? There were all these questions going on in my head, and I was just like, oh goodness. It was just it was a mess, but it was just so funny because I was just like, I actually can relate to you. I promise you, out of everyone here, I understand more than anyone else.
Oh man. Did you okay, so that's hilarious.
Yeah.
But also, did you think at all, did you ever play the scenarios in your head where you're driving, or someone's driving you to the hospital to give birth or whatever, and what if there's the possibility that I give birth on the side of the road? I'm going to have to call 911, or someone's going to call 911. I'm going to be one of the folks that calls me. Did any of that stuff ever go through your mind?
Actually, it's funny you asked this, because one of the funniest calls that ever happened at 911 was when I was pregnant. One of the guys I worked with, he's just one of those class clowns. He's great. He doesn't work with us anymore, which was terrible because he's my favorite trainer, but we don't tell him that. So anyway, I had my daughter's father at the time. He was working night shift. So I was at home by myself. Well, it was like 3:00 in the morning. I was a night shifter at the time. So I was like awake and I started having like Braxton Hicks contractions. Well, so my supervisor, she had 3 kids and she was we were pregnant together. So I was like, I'm just going to call her and ask her like, hey, what does this feel like? Cause I don't really know what to expect, or whatever. So I call work and I was like, hey, can I talk to Chloe real quick? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they put me on hold, like the nice little hold music plays. Well, Brian picks up the phone, and I remember I was laying on we had like a couch that turned into the fold out bed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was like laying down and I heard his voice, and I just like, I don't like, you remember the game Don't Wake Daddy where he like pings up, like he just like sits up.
Yeah.
I like sat up because I was like, no. And I just hear him go, do not hang up the phone. Step 1. And he's like, remove all clothing below the waist. And he like starts going right down our cards. And I was like, Brian, I am going to kill you. I am not in the mood. And he's like, step 2. And I was just like, I like hang up on him. So like the phone like calls, and I was like, I see it's work. And I'm like, okay, this is either going to be Brian calling me back or it's going to be Chloe, who I actually need to talk to. So I was like, all right. So I like answer the phone and I'm like, hello. And I hear step 3. And I was like, oh! It's like a big joke at our work. Oh. They're like, do you remember when you were pregnant and Brian answered the phone? And I'm like, yes, I will never forget it. Cause I was just like, that's the last person I want giving me instructions on how to deliver a baby. I have these cards memorized. I'll take care of myself.
Right. Yeah. I know about the shoestring and all that other stuff.
I will not use the bathroom.
Oh my God. That is hilarious. Did you ever get to talk to Chloe then?
Yeah. Well, finally, I just called her cell phone after that. Cause I was like, I'm not calling the work phone again. I'm going to need you to answer this. And so I ended up delivering Aspen the next week, but it was just like, oh my gosh, I could not. I was just like, we just talked about this morning at 3 a.m. when I had to go in. And so I was just like, this is crazy.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
Yes.
Well, let's jump into our DeLorean. Let's go back in time.
Okay.
How did you get into dispatching to begin with?
My mom actually, before 911 was like a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
she worked as, I guess, like I don't want to say makeshift dispatcher, but when she was in high school, she worked for their police department.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her like telling me stories whenever we were younger or whatever. And, of course, I think we probably all watched like Rescue 911.
Yeah.
So it's like something I was always interested in. Well, I had lived in Louisiana with my grandparents for a while, and because my grandpa wasn't doing very well health-wise. And when I moved home, I was looking for a job. And so my mom had told me that one of the ladies she worked with, her son had just got a job at 911 and she knew where to apply for it. So I was like, oh, awesome. And so I didn't know I was pregnant at the time. It's kind of funny because I went to fill out the application process, and they're like, do you think you have enough time to take this test? And so I'm like, sure, like, why not? Yeah. And at the time, we were like, Genesee County was going through a lot. We were about to take over the city of Flint, which it used to be its own entity. And I went in and took the test. And I remember like somebody had hit their emergency tone. So it was like the loud ba-bump, ba-bump, ba-bump in the center. And I swear to God, I thought somebody had robbed a bank or something, the way that thing was like the way it was like bonking. And so I was like, This is so cool. Like I was so distracted from my test. I didn't know if I was going to like pass the test or not, just because I was like, what is going on? I just remember finding it so interesting. And then like when I did my observation shift, I was like, yeah, I think I really like this. I had no idea what dispatchers did. I thought we just answered calls and hit a button and somehow it showed up on like the police screen and they read everything. We didn't have to do anything for them, but here I am 6 years 6 years next month.
Oh man, so, that is awesome. So that process, how long did that process, the hiring process that is, how long did that last?
So I applied in August. Mm-hmm. I took my test that day. So that I think sped things up a little bit because I've heard for a lot of people, it took a lot longer. Mm-hmm. Genesee was going through the process of taking over the city of Flint. So they were trying to hire a ton of people all at once. And I think that also played an effect to it. But I had to do, I did my test. I came in for an observation. When I did my test and came in for an observation, we were under one director. Mm-hmm. By the time I did my interview, our director had actually passed away. And so they were in the transition of moving our deputy director into director, and we were taking over the city of Flint. So I did not get hired on until November 23rd. So it was November 23rd that, so from like August, probably like 20th to November 23rd is whenever I got hired on. So it's a bit of a process. It's the same process we have now. I tell everybody that's interested, I'm like, if you're interested, get your stuff in now because it takes a while. You're not going to get hired tomorrow. The psych eval, I had no idea it was going to be like an 8-hour long psych eval. I was just like, yeah.
No
it was
way.
a whole long process.
So when I got hired on over at Allegan, I had one test that I took. It was a
Must be
written,
nice.
yeah. It was, excuse me. It was a written. It's completely different now from what I've been told. But when I went in, it was just a written test. Well, I had the interview, of course, and then there was a written test. It was 100 questions, and I had like an hour to do it. But it was all like common sense stuff. And I sat there, and they're like, "You passed. You got them all right except for one." I was like, "What?" I was like, "What was the one?" And man, I will never forget that
Can't wait to hear
question.
this.
That question had something to do with if there was a something like if there was an accident and someone was calling for, I don't know what it was, something's calling for someone, do you just go ahead and do it, or do you wait for the sergeant to tell you? And I remember sitting there, and I think I marked the my first gut was to just send, and then for whatever reason I second guessed myself, and I put to wait for the sergeant, and that was the one that I missed. And I remember sitting there, I was so pissed off because I was like, man, I could have got just
100%.
yes, I could have aced it if I would have just gone with my gut, because yes, you just send them out. I don't know why so yeah, that one. I remember the person who was giving me the test, they were just laughing at me. They're like, it's fine. I was like, no, it's not fine, because it's not fine, damn it. I want to do it again.
Right.
But I ended up passing the test, and then, there was the background, but that was it. There was no psych eval. There was nothing like that. So every time someone says that there was a psych eval and stuff, I'm always curious as to what you do. Like, are they showing you pictures with ink blots, or are they asking you questions to make sure you're, not having issues or anything, or like what happened?
We had like 500 questions we had to answer on like one of the tests. There was like another one, I think that had like 300, and they were all essentially like the same questions, just worded differently. And I remember my psych eval, one of the questions were, I don't like it when people pass me on the highway, true or false? And I said, true. I don't like it when people pass me on the highway. So I remember when I got back to her room, she was like, so Christa, you marked on here, you don't like it when people pass you on the highway. And I was like, that's correct. And she's like, and so what do you do? Like, what runs through your head when they pass you? You try to run them off the road? And I was like, no, I just speed up.
Right.
What?
Yeah, it's like, I'm not road raging or anything. I just don't like it. But
yeah,
it doesn't mean that I'm going to run them off the road.
Right. Well, it was a big joke too, because I like came out of that psych eval and I like looked at my mom and I'm like, I did not pass that. I did not get the job. Like, I just need to keep job. Like, I need to find a different job, whatever. And I had told my sister-in-law, I told her what had happened. And so her and I were going to IKEA a couple days later, and she was riding in the slow lane and a couple cars passed us, and she like patted my leg and she's like, are you okay? And I was like, shut up.
Oh man, that is hilarious.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. So it's like ongoing joke with it. But
so once you got past all of that, you had already done your observation and everything. And actually, before I get to this one part, when you went in for the observation, was there anything going on? And the reason I ask is because a lot of times I remember being in dispatch and people would come in to do a sit along and there would be nothing going on. And
yeah,
the person would say, oh, this is pretty easy. I'm like, no. This is not a true depiction of what dispatch is like.
I remember like my observation shift. I remember the person I sat with is actually one of my supervisors now. And I know this probably sounds so stupid, but hey, I'm a dispatcher, so food is relevant. Yes. And I remember they didn't tell me I needed to bring food. And then it was like one of those like awkward things. Like I felt awkward ordering food with them. Like one of my favorite things ever is pizza rolls. And I remember the guy that I was observing with, he had a plate full of pizza rolls. And I was just like, gosh darn it, I just want these pizza rolls. And I was just like, so I'm like sitting there answering phone calls. And I was like, I'm hitting McDonald's as soon as I leave here. Because at the time, I don't know how most centers do their observation, but at the time, our observation shifts were for 12 hours. You had to go in from 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. So I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like but I remember one of the guys that I worked with for a while, he was standing at the screen, and I remember he was standing at the fire dispatch, and I don't remember what happened. I just remember him yelling at the screen, like, why won't they just listen? And I was like, what is happening over there? And now I feel like I'm that person sometimes. Why are they not listening to me? Am I going out? Did the tones get dropped?
That is craziness, because our observation time or sit-alongs would only be 4 hours. It'd be
Oh,
4
yeah,
hours,
no.
so 12 hours, that's nuts. But then again, for you, I mean, Genesee County is a big county. So before we get into like what your training was like, how many people are usually working on at a time? And do you know kind of how big the area is that you all cover?
So we have we do the entire county, because I know some counties get broken up into like, oh, so-and-so dispatches for themselves. Fenton
Yeah.
City, which is one of our smaller cities, they do dispatch on their own.
Mhm.
I believe it's like 23 police agencies and like, I think 16 or 18 fire agencies. It's something like that.
Man.
And then all of our EMS too.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's pretty big. Flint City takes up most of our phone calls that we get, though. A lot of like the police calls, I should say. Fire's obviously sporadic because flames don't really care where the jurisdiction is, but
That's true.
yeah. So, but no, it's pretty busy. We had, as busy as we are, there was like one day we had the supervisor had sent out like a message to the county, like we have like where you can do the reverse 911,
Mhm.
and he had sent out the thing. Well, the only thing that it recorded was dial 911. So it was catastrophic in there as far as the phone calls go, like, because it was
Yeah.
just like everybody was calling 911 because they get a phone call and all it says is call 911. So they did. And we were just like, oh my gosh, it was so crazy. It was one of the busiest days in there. We're like, you don't have to call. Only call if it's an emergency. Like,
Right. Oh,
he ended up
man.
buying us pizza the next day. So
Oh, well, that's good at least. Yeah.
yeah,
That's the way to us, right? To the
for
heart is
sure.
through the stomach.
Even the police officers know that. They know, like, if they mess up, like, hey, we're just going to deliver some food up there.
Right. Yeah. And it'll be all good. It will be good to
We
go.
had a police officer from a different county. He had called in and he felt so bad about the way he talked to the dispatchers.
Mhm.
He was like, he called up there the next day, apologized to everyone because they happened to be the same team working. He's like, I just want to talk to who took the call. He's like, I'm an officer. I'm not usually in that spot to call 911. I'm on the other side of the call. His neighbor had some medical issue. And so he called in, he apologized to all of us, and then he ended up having food delivered the next day. It was so nice. We're just like,
Nice.
yeah, I'm like, even officers in other jurisdictions, so it's clearly not just us.
Hey, that's pretty cool then.
Yeah.
So what was your training like? How did it start out? And the reason I ask is because it seems like every center is different, right? My center, we had 4 different phases. So we started out with learning geography and all our codes and all that other stuff, working the computer aided dispatch system, and then we would go over to lean. Which for those who are watching and listening right now, lean is what it's called in Michigan, but it's running like the plates and driver's license, NCIC, all that other stuff. And then the third phase was main radios, and then the fourth phase was our shadow phase, where the trainer was not there anymore. I mean, they were in the room, but we were working all as a team now, putting it all together. Was your training kind of similar, or what was it like?
No. So we do, whenever I first started,
Mhm.
because we had such a big influx of hiring, what they were doing was they were training people on phones. And then as soon as you passed like the phones phase, there was phones phase 1, phones phase 2. Once you passed the phones phase 2, they just left you kind of, we joke and call it phones purgatory. They would leave you like in phones purgatory for what was just supposed to be a few months. Well, because they were having to push so many people through with like the hiring of Flint City, we were just like every 911 center, so they were already short-staffed. What they ended up doing was I was on phones for a full year. Me and pretty much everyone that was hired in with me, we were on phones for a full year. And then after that, they sent us to radio. We got to go back to radio and train on radio, and we did radio phase 1, radio phase 2. Normally, how it works in our 911 centers, you do phones phase 1, phones phase 2, shadow, and then we don't do the shadow phase phones yet. They usually will go to radio, and then we do radio phase 2, and then you have like your shadow phase. So it's and now they're going back to the old way because we're so short staffed again, where we're just pushing people through on phones and doing phones purgatory. So I do think this time will be a little bit better, because I think last time like a lot of us were left on phones for way too long. So there was like things we didn't understand because we had never dispatched. Like I didn't understand, like when they would get frustrated, like, why didn't you get this? And I'm like, what do you need that for? And then it was
Right.
like, once I got back to dispatch, I'm like, okay, it does make a difference to have that. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah.
So it was just like, like there was all of this stuff. So I do think like this time going around, they'll probably do phones phase 1 and 2. And then I know that they're trying to hire another group and do phones phase 1 and 2. But then once that group's done, we're going to bring the other group back and do radio. Because a lot of times too, what we're seeing is a lot of them get very overwhelmed with the amount of information we're giving them and everything that goes into it. I mean, fire radio and police radio alone, like in our county anyways, there's so much because we have a north and south radio. Then we have Flint City radio, which is dispatched completely different than the rest of them. We have certain jurisdictions that are direct dispatched. We have some that aren't direct dispatched. Like we have fire departments that respond on medicals. We have some fire departments that will only respond on medicals if they're this far away. And then we have other fire departments that don't respond on medicals at all. So it's like, it's a lot of information to like throw at them. So I think it will be nice for them to get through phones, build up some of their confidence while they're sitting at phones, and then move them back to radio and break the confidence down again because it gets rough.
Man, that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
So before we get into some of the calls that you've taken, I have to ask, because this was something that I had heard when I first started working for in digital. And I think I might have been in digital about a year before you started working for the county, going into it. So I don't know, actually, maybe we might have started around the same time. But one of the things that I had heard, because one of my partners, who was a training coordinator at the time, was at your county and teaching all of you how to use, I believe it was like the backup phone system and stuff, and some other things. And I remember her telling me, she goes, Ricardo, I have never seen something like this before, where they like randomly will be chosen to like take a call. Like if they're taking calls, like they'll just hear like a quick tone and then the line is hot, the mic is hot rather,
Yep.
and they just go into it. And if they're eating or they're drinking something, it's like, you hold it, swallow it, or do something, because you have to jump right into it. So I wanted to see if you could kind of talk about that a little bit. What is that like? I mean, you and I were talking a little bit before this,
Yeah.
and you had the scenario or the example of like eating crunchy tacos.
Yeah, Mexican like, because
Yes.
everybody loves like Taco Bell. We have this really great place called El Cozumel. Like they're all really, so the worst thing to get is like chips and queso or crunchy tacos, because so the noise that makes in your ear and your headset is like almost like the Law and Order doink doink sound.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's an open line and you're like, Genesee County 911, like what's your emergency or what's your address or however they want to say it. And you'll be sitting there and you'll like just take this big bite of like queso and chips, and then you're like bite down and it's a crunch, and then it's doink doink at the same time, and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Like, so then you're like, do I finish chewing? Do I talk with food in my mouth? Can they tell I have food in my mouth?
Yes.
Like, so you're just like, we have like a mute switch, and sometimes I'll like finish chewing and I'm like, Genesee County 911, and it's just like, yeah, it's crazy. It's funny because the rotation it goes in is whoever, essentially, if you're available, you're going to get the call. So like, obviously it doesn't like wait for someone to get off the phone and then get it. Yeah. But if everyone's available, it does it in order of who like if I just got off the phone and then my friend gets off the phone after me, I'll get the phone call before she does. So it does it like in rotation. But we also have where it's like the make busy, like on the phone. If you make busy, then it puts you at the end of the rotation. So sometimes you'll see like people's little phones, like will highlight and then unhighlight, and you're like, they'll like put them, we call it double clicking. They'll double click. So then they go to the back of the rotation and we're like, oh, no. We just saw you do that. Like,
oh man, that is funny.
Yeah.
Oh man. So think in my head, I can hear the dun dun, like the,
that's what
the Law and Order. And it sounds, slightly intimidating as it is, something else is coming and you're moving to the next scene or whatever from the show. Yeah. But I can just imagine sitting there at work, eating something or taking a drink and hearing that and just being, oh, here comes one. And then, right. And then you just go into it and someone is there, or, you hear the tone, you're drinking something or eating something and someone is just screaming.
Yeah. Okay. And those are the best ones though, because if they're screaming, they can't hear you crunch the chips.
This is true. This is true.
You got a second, just chew real fast.
Yes. Oh man, that is nuts. And so we didn't have anything like that, of course, as the phone calls were coming in. But I do remember a couple times on a morning shift, actually, that I was working overtime. I had made steak and eggs, and I went to take a bite of steak, and I remember it being a big chunk, and the phone rang. And there was nobody else. It was just me on phones, and I pick up the phone, and I had to like go into squirrel mode
Yeah.
and and throw it back there. And oh god, it was horrible.
Could you
because
imagine if you had choked on that steak? Like,
well, that would have, yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah,
stand by, I gotta read the card to figure out how to give myself the Heimlich.
yes. Yeah. Stand up, throw yourself onto the table. That's exactly how it would have been. But I remember, I think it was a verbal domestic that was going on, and it was a longer call, and we didn't have any officers in the area. They were all on something else, but they were separated, and we were trying to get someone to go over there. And the entire time, I've got this chunk of steak in my cheek. And I said, "You're okay, right? You're fine at the moment." And they're like, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, I'm going to be here. I'm going to mute myself really quick because I have to answer the radio. So I'm still listening." There was no radio traffic, but I
You just had
muted
to
so that I could chew as fast as possible. But by that time, it tasted so horrible. I just ended up spitting it out in the trash can. And I'm pretty sure someone walked by and saw me. They're like, "Ah, what are you doing?"
Like, I couldn't chew it.
Right. I was like, the juices and everything is gone. It's like when you chew like fruit stripe gum or any of those cheap
Oh yeah.
sticks of gum where like the juice is very flavorful for like 1 second and then it's just
Yeah.
horrible.
Gone.
Yes. That's basically how it was. And then I spit it out, had that reaction, got back on the phone. I'm like, all right, there's somebody headed that way. You should be okay. Oh man. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. So I have to ask as well, as we're going to get into some of the training that you did, or not the training, rather some of the phone calls. So you cover Flint, and at
Mhm.
one time, I'm pretty sure it's not this anymore. I think it's a different city, but I remember at one time, Flint was like the murder capital of the United States. And I say that as well because when I was in dispatch, we had an officer who became a deputy, and he came from Flint. And I remember him coming up and was talking to us, and he goes, "It's really weird being over here because," and this was halfway through the shift. And I remember him saying, by this time, halfway through the shift, we have already worked several like homicides. And we're just sitting there listening to him talk. And he goes, "This is a walk in the park compared to what I was doing over there in Flint." So as we're getting into like some of the calls and stuff, but also for Flint, like, man, what is it like taking calls from that area? Has it been like that or has it changed?
So I know that as of, I believe it was July or August, Flint was
Mhm.
actually, I don't want to say on track because it's not necessarily something they want to do, but they were on track to beat the highest record that they've ever had for homicides in a year.
Wow.
And so it just, it's like one of those things that's kind of like, I don't know, very sombering to think about because you sit there and like we hear whenever we go to classes, and not that like our dispatch center is any better than any other center because it's not, but we do get chosen a lot of times in classes because they'll be like, they deal with Flint, like they have this that they deal with. And a lot of people will ask us for like our, like I guess advice or whatever on how to deal with those calls because they do get to be so many, and you get so many like parents calling in that you're like talking to them, or people calling in, and I like gang related ones to be like, who shot him? We don't know who shot him. We saw them shoot him. We saw this, and like they refuse to give you information. There's like a lot of going on. I tell people all the time, I say, I'm very close with a lot of the city of Flint officers, and some of them are some of my best friends. And I always say, I was like, I give you guys a lot of crap because I'll be like, oh, are you doing anything? Because they've got calls pending. Like, you guys don't, we always tease them and say they don't do anything. But like, realistically, I tell people all the time, I'm like, literally I don't want to say the laziest, but like the officer that does the least amount in the city of Flint for that day did circles around officers who aren't in that area. Like they have so much that they deal with and go through. And then like, honest, like they get so many like just nasty people. Like there are certain areas where like, they might see an officer driving down the road and they'll be like, wave at him or say hi. in certain jurisdictions, they don't necessarily get that because they're not thought of as like, and I know this is a lot of America right now or really around the world, they're not thought of as like heroes, you know? And so they do this job and they really are, like, I really do have high respect for our City of Flint officers.
I can just imagine, and just the way you're saying it as well, the least amount that person does in that area is probably not even close to the most amount that would happen in the area where I worked, because there was so much. And I remember hearing those stories and just thinking, man, I can't even imagine. It's one thing for all of you who are responding to it, but it's already been done. If something is going on in progress, that's something that you are dealing with, that everyone who's there in the center, you're dealing with all of that before all of them get there. And I think that's another thing that people don't understand, is that when you're talking about first responders, like, I always refer to those who are responding as field responders. Like, they're the ones out in the field responding to it, where what we've done, that's first response, and they're throughout the entire call. So there's a lot that ends up coming with that. So for your career, starting out, you've been doing this, like you said, 5.5, 6 years or so. Do you remember some of those early calls that you ended up taking when you first started out?
Yeah, I remember like one of the calls, and like, I guess this was my naive self just believe, like, like you tend to believe everybody, like nobody lies. Yeah. And I remember there was like this one call I took, and I remember I was actually still in training. And I remember this girl, she was telling me how her mom had left her at home and she was there with all of her siblings. She just wanted to call her grandma. And I remember my trainer going, she's not at home by herself. She's like one of our frequent flyers, or whatever. And I'm like, no, she has to be at home by herself. Like, who would lie about that? And I remember the police got there and her mom was there. And I felt so betrayed by this girl, because I was like, she lied to me. Like, what? Who lies to 911? Yeah. Now I'm like, you were so naive. Like,
yeah, it's interesting, right? Because so I remember having a similar situation where a girl had called, and she had said that she'd been arguing with her parents, and her parents locked her in her room. And she was telling me that she was afraid. And I said, okay, we're getting people out there, because there was all this other stuff that she was saying that was going on. And I was trying to find her location, because the phone that she called on was, one of those NSI phones, the non-service initialized, that they have no service, but they can call 911. So it was something like that. And, during that time, we didn't have like the stuff that you all have now, where you can pinpoint someone's location and all. So I'm trying to figure out where she's at. I'm trying to get her address and all this other stuff. And we just happened to have some information in our in-house computer where I ran the phone number, and there was an address that ended up coming back because of previous calls with that number. And, a number that was attached to it, rather, because I looked up, I remember we started putting down the 911 and then whatever the rest of the number was. We started logging all of those, and someone had logged this specific one and actually had an address for it. And we send people out there. So as they're headed out there, she goes, somebody's coming. And I said, just set the phone down. I said, don't hang up, please. Don't hang up. Just set the phone down so that I can listen, so I can let the officers know what is going on. So she sets the phone down. I hear the door like kind of get kicked in a little bit. And then I hear two voices. However, the deeper voice, I could tell, was my caller trying to be like her dad or something.
Oh God.
So I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, just continue doing what you're doing, don't speculate or whatever. But I could tell that it was her voice. She was just, trying to make it deeper. And then she gets back on the phone and I'm like, are you okay? She's like, yeah. Well, the officers get out there. The parents had no idea what was going on. She was making stuff up because she was upset because her parents didn't let her leave, and was trying to get him in trouble. And I was the same, right? And I was the same as you. I remember sitting there and I thought, dude, for real? Like,
you feel so betrayed. Like, I trusted you.
Yeah.
I went on the line. I told the officer that he was crazy, not you.
Yes, and yeah, and everything that she was telling me, like it was, and that's what we do, right? Every
Mhm.
single call, no matter what it is, whether it be someone ends up saying, "Oh, that's one of our people who calls all the time," we always have to take it as priority one,
Yeah.
something serious, because it's that one time that we don't, right?
Yes.
Where we think, no, it's probably just messing around, that it's something that's actually going on,
Yep.
and then we're in the news or something.
Yeah.
I mean
We've
that,
all probably seen that happen. We're like, oh man, I'm so glad I put that up. Like you're
right?
like, yeah,
Yeah, it's a hard thing. You put your trust and everything in every person who calls because you want to get them help. That is what we do.
right.
And but then you have something like that and you get off the call, you're like, damn, they
Yeah.
lied to me.
Yeah. I just remember like feeling so betrayed in the beginning. And I was like, this is why they don't trust anyone.
Yeah. Well, and for real, because you're pouring your heart out for this person because you want to get them that help. And then when you find out it's a lie, you're just like, damn it.
Yeah.
All
You're like,
right.
man, I was so wrong.
I
Like,
know, and it doesn't change our thoughts to anybody else who calls, but we continue to do what we're
yeah.
doing, but
Yep.
that's still that I always think back to some of those, like, yep, that person got me by saying that, this other person got me by saying that, but I still did my job and I got them help. They're the ones who
Right.
got caught in the lie.
Yeah, the worst is like whenever you're typing like 90 miles an hour, like this is so terrible. I know what's going on. Like you're like, you got to get them there, and then they get on there and they're like, we just spoke to the police officer. You want to know what it was? It was this, and you're like, like you're like so
Yeah.
invested. Like you're like, I need an update on this, and then
Uh,
they get it, and it was nothing, and you're just like, gosh darn it.
right. Oh man, that is crazy. There's so many different calls, so many different situations that happen in this job, but we learn from every single one of them. But
Yes.
also it also kind of changes us, right? And
Oh
some of
yeah.
the stuff that happens. I know for me, for me, I like whenever I see my kid running with something, I'm like, don't run with that. And they're
Yeah.
like, why can't I just run? And I'm like, because so this one specifically, one of my no, it wasn't one of my kids, it was one of my kids' friends who was visiting. They were kind of prancing around holding a fork. And I was like, no, put the fork
No.
down. I don't know why you're doing that to begin with, but please put the fork down. And they're like, why? I'm just playing around. So I ended up saying, because if you fall, you might stab yourself with that fork. And they're like, they dropped it right away. Because I'm not gonna nickel and dime. Like, I took a call
Yep.
where a kid was running with a fork and they tripped and they fell and the fork went up into the roof of their
Oh.
mouth. Yes, and got stuck, and I had to send EMS out and everything else. And I remember hearing the parent in the background saying, "I told you not to be running with the fork." And at the time I'm thinking, okay, yeah, you can say something to the kid later. The kid is in pain right now. The kid
Right.
is already sorry.
Yeah. Like kids like I did learn my lesson, I promise.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a fork sticking out of my mouth. I know this.
Yeah.
Stop yelling at the kid.
I did whenever I was pregnant. They were like, you're going to change so many rules for your kid from
Mhm.
working here. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I was like, it's pretty funny because like I'm friends with some of the officers and they know her. And
Mhm.
so she told me one time that I couldn't do anything to her because she was friends with the police. And I was like, oh, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, well, we're about to call one of them to come get you because I'm telling you right now, I'm going to knock you out.
It's funny that you say that because there was one time I remember as a teenager, as a snotty ass shitty teenager, thinking that I knew everything and I wasn't going to let my mom talk to me or treat me a certain way. I remember telling her excuse me, that oh, this is so bad, but it's funny. I remember telling her, you can't, I don't know, spank me or grab me by the arm or something. I said, I will call the police and I will tell them that you've been beating me. And I
Yeah. What'd
remember
she say?
okay, so my mom is like 5 foot nothing. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the pictures that I've taken with her. She's tiny, but she is spunky as hell. Just straight up 100% Mexican mom will pick me up and break me if she needed to, no matter how tall I am or how big I am. And so she looks me dead in the face and she says, "You know what? Go ahead, call them." Go ahead and call them and tell them that, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to beat your ass until they get here. And when I get out of jail, I'm going to beat your ass again. And I remember standing there and I was like, okay,
Just kidding. It was just a joke, Mom. It was just
okay,
a joke.
I'll go clean my room or whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah. My mom, one time, she told us, I don't know why, but I was like, I'm going to call CPS on you. And she said, you go ahead and you're going to want to dial 911 real fast because you're going to need the police. She goes, you're going to need the police officers by the time I get done to get me off of you. And I remember I was like, nope, never saying that again.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. My mom was
love
raised
you.
in Louisiana. So she's got like that Cajun bayou thing going on. And it was like,
snaps.
yeah, no.
Literally.
I tell everyone, I'm like,
almost snaps.
yeah. Like I told them, I was like, whenever it listened, because they're always like, your mom is the sweetest person, and she is. She would do anything for anyone. And I'm like, but listen, when you hear her Cajun accent, there's a difference in the Southern accent and the Cajun accent.
Mhm.
When you hear that Cajun accent come out, you better take off running because there's not a prayer in the world that can save you.
Oh man, I'm gonna snatch you up with that Creole.
Yeah. It has its benefits. The food is great, but
Right, yeah. The food is great, but the beatings, those are
yeah.
not so much the beatings, but just the looks, right?
No,
Your
there were
parents can
beatings.
look at you. Oh man, that is funny. So in what other ways has the job kind of changed you? I know, like, other things too. I've been out of dispatch for 8 years now. However, I still use phonetics with people on the phone sometimes.
Yeah.
And when I'm giving directions, like, if you go west, such and such, and then go, north or whatever, and people are just like, why do you talk like that? Like, I'm sorry. It's
Yeah,
just, it stuck with me.
I guess like one of the things like that, and it gives you a whole new outlook on life, which I think,
Mhm.
most careers probably do that. They give you a different
Yeah.
outlook, different perspectives, and different outlooks on life. And I remember, I remember, like, and I know this probably like sounds crazy because honestly, a lot of dispatchers, like with Christianity and stuff, I am a Christian, and I remember like sometimes like being so afraid, like in the middle of like when to turn that on and turn that off, like
Yeah.
you can't, like, I don't ever bring it up to a caller, but I remember, like a caller one time telling me like it was a suicidal caller. I remember she was just so upset, and she was like, ma'am, like I've read, she's like, I've got my Bible right here. And I remember I was like, it was one of those like moments, like, as I guess like for me anyways, it's like,
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily ashamed. I'm not ashamed to be a Christian, but it was always like, you can't, like, it's taboo. Like, it's one of those like taboo things.
Yeah.
I remember that was like one of those really cool moments, like in my career where I was able to like help her, and like we turned to like some scriptures, and I remember that like really helping her, and it was like I don't know, it gave me a different perspective on, I guess, like my life and different things that like it helped me reevaluate like some things for me, like I guess I would say definitely for the better,
Mhm.
but stuff like that. And I recently took a call, I guess it was at the beginning of this year, and it was probably like one of the hardest calls I've ever taken. And I remember in the call, it was in the city of Flint, and they had a shooting, and it was a drive-by shooting. And this particular incident, the male that I got on the phone, because we had multiple people on the phone, it ended up being, when they drove by, they were aiming for one house. They ended up hitting neighbors on either end, like on either side of that person's house. And the neighbor that I happened to get, he was taking his trash out. And he was taking his trash out. They came by, did the drive-by, and he was shot, I believe it was 3 times, and all in the back. And while I was on the phone with him, I could still hear the shots being fired. And I remember him telling me he was crawling into his basement. He was trying to get into his basement. He's like, ma'am, I'm armed. And I was like, okay. And I remember like, like all the rules of dispatch go right out the window, where you're just like, I remember telling like our EMS dispatch, I'm like, you have to send them into his house. Like, it was a drive-by, the shooters aren't there. But like in my mind, I was like, I don't care if they clear the scene. Like, he's in the basement of this house. And as he's in the basement of this house, I'm like telling him, like, put pressure up against your back. Like, because he couldn't put pressure. And so he was like putting his back up against the wall, trying to put pressure on. And it was crazy to me because as I'm sitting there, and it's like breaking my heart, because he's like, I'm going to die. And I hear him say, hi, honey. And he had a second phone, and he called his daughter while he was on the phone with me and told his daughter goodbye.
Oh.
And that was like, she was on speaker, and that was like so heart-wrenching for me as a mom. Like, I'm just like, I don't even like, I'm like sitting there and I'm like, listen, we've got help coming. And I'm like telling our EMS dispatcher, I'm like, you've got to get them in. Like, this guy is literally dying. Like, and I remember he hung up with his daughter. I listened to her, like cry and everything. And that broke my heart. But then he called his mom after that. And I had to listen to him tell his mom and his daughter goodbye. And while he was on the phone with me, I was like, listen to me. I said, I am not hanging up this phone with you until they get there to help you. They are on their way. And I remember just like reassuring him of that. Well, so he ended up passing away while he was on the phone with me. And I remember it was so like heartbreaking. It was like one of those moments like in dispatch where you're just like, I need a minute, but there were so many calls coming in. Like I didn't really get that minute. And I remember his phone disconnected, and I remember calling it back, but it wasn't until, we have challenge coins at our work that we get, and we'll get recognized for some things. And the entire team that day was recognized. And I remember my director, I remember him looking at me whenever he was giving it. And he said, Christa, he said, I don't know how you did that. He said, because he said, listening to it tore me up. He said, and it wasn't until you were trying to call him back, because like our phone system still records until I hit the release button. So as I was calling him back, it was all on the same recording. And I was praying in the middle of, I remember I was just praying. I was like, dear God, please let him answer. Please, please, please let him answer. And it was just like, those moments in dispatch, I think, change us all, because it was just one of those, like, I think we all are control freaks. We all try to have like that. I think that's probably like required to be a dispatcher. And it was like one of those like where everything's out of your hands. Like you can't do anything. I just wanted him to answer the phone just for like me to know he was okay. And it didn't happen. But that call definitely changed me. That was one of the craziest calls I've ever taken. But
oh man, that yeah, those are one of the ones that definitely sticks with us, right?
They ended up having, I think it was 5 victims from that. There was 5 victims, and I believe 2 of them were homicide. They ended up being homicides on that. They had like 3 that made it, which was great, but that was crazy.
I can't even imagine. We had a lot of calls that we dealt with, but nothing like that. I mean, and there were definitely some hard ones. And it's just, did you end up having like a debriefing or anything after that? Or, I mean, I know you said that you didn't even get that minute to reflect or decompress or anything. You just continue on, and sometimes, I always preach on, if you have a minute, to go take that minute for yourself. But I think also sometimes, it happens that we don't get that time, so that we're not, kind of dwelling on it at that moment. You move on to the next one. And even though it sucks because you don't get that moment, it kind of, prolongs the harshness of what you just heard by going to the next call. And then afterwards, you can hopefully take that moment. But sometimes if you don't get that moment, it's when you're driving home, or sometimes a few days after that, or you see or hear something that triggers it. And then you're just there, by yourself, or maybe with family or friends, and you just start crying, and they're like, what's wrong? You're like, I'll tell you later.
We'll talk about this later. It was, I remember one of my friends, she came up to me because she knew I was having a really hard time with it. Cause I just don't cry very often in front of people. And I remember I knew the tears were streaming down my cheeks, and she like came up and she's like, go take a minute. And I remember she put my phone in busy, and my supervisor came up, and he had just got on. It was not his fault at all. We do like a staggered where like the dispatcher gets there an hour before we go off. And he's like, don't take your break yet. I need you to wait for this, XYZ. And I was like, okay. So I like went back into ready. And then like my friend that had just came and like made me busy, she's like, no, she needs like, give her 10 minutes. Like I was just like, so a few minutes went by, and then I was able to go. We always say take a lap in the parking lot. So we'll like go outside and like take a lap to just kind of regroup, which I was very thankful for. And it was terrible too. His daughter ended up calling in before I went and took that lap. So I'm like, I heard one of the girls say her name, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, that's my guy. Like, let her know the police are inside. Like, cause they were at that point in time, they were in his house. And that was just like, it's crazy too. Like sometimes you're just like, how did I get that phone call? Like how, like what stars aligned that it just happened to be me dealing with that phone call. It's always like, and it's always like luck of the draw, especially at our center. Cause like you were saying, like it just pings in your ear. I don't have to hit answer, or I don't know. It gets crazy.
When thinking about that, have you have you connected to anything in your life? Anything like before that call? Like, have you thought about, and the reason I say it, and it goes along with kind of what we were talking about in the beginning of the episode, where sometimes, and I believe this as well, especially with as many people that I've spoken to, they have shared a story like this and have said, like, what are the odds? But then they also have shared a story, either right after or right before it, where they have dealt with something similar in their own lives that ended up helping them with that person that was calling in. And so I don't know if, you've thought about it and thought, I dealt with this in my past, and I was able to speak to this person better than, or handle this call better than maybe someone else who has not had that experience before. Or, maybe it's just that there are others that are going to be coming later on that are going to deal with something similar, and you're going to be able to help them through it because you were able to get through it yourself.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like, we always have like different calls. Like I said, with it being the city of Flint, there's always homicides and stuff. And I don't know that necessarily it was anything that I could have done for him. I don't know that. But I do think the compassion that we have, we sometimes forget about. Like that or maybe we put to the back burner because sometimes us having too much compassion affects us in the long run, because you get attached to calls, and that's something that we cannot get attached to every call. It's not something that we would be able to go on doing our job with. And I do think that maybe previous calls I've had helped me deal with that call, like detaching myself from it, because we had another call, and this particular call was not necessarily mine. It was a friend of mine's, and her and I became really close. We had like went out drinking one night, and it just so happened that her ex-boyfriend, who she was on and off again with, I was in his wedding. I was a bridesmaid in his wedding for his first wife. And so we're like, what are the chances? Because she like mentioned his name, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was in his first wedding as a bridesmaid. Like, what are the chances of this happening? So a couple months goes by, and her and I both happen to be working overtime. Wasn't my scheduled shift, wasn't her scheduled shift. And I remember our director came down on the floor to talk to me about something. And she came over to me kind of like in this, not panic, but she just like, it was just like this like blank stare. She didn't know what to do. And I like looked at her, I'm like, are you okay? And she's like, and she had her phone, she like had her mute switch, and she's like, I think they found him dead, and I've got them on the phone. And I was like, who do you have on the phone? And she said, Alexis. Alexis was my friend who I was the bridesmaid in her wedding. And he was supposed to pick her boys up, and he is a phenomenal dad. He never missed a time with them. And so Jordan ended up handing the phone over to me, and it just so happened that she also used to be a dispatcher in a different county. And it was one of those where like Jordan, I told Jordan, just hand it over to me, like it's fine, just hand it over. And when I got her on the phone, I remember just saying, I remember going, it's Christa, and she just lost it. And I remember she was like, I don't know what to do. And he ended up, he had passed away or whatever. And I remember that call was very hard to deal with, because it was like, there were so many things going on with that call. And then for a while, they had thought that he had possibly, done it himself, like that he had possibly committed suicide. And I remember I had to break the news to her, because I didn't want her to find out from like anybody else, the dispatcher that had also taken it. And I was just like, and I remember breaking the news to her, and then it wasn't that at all. It ended up being a medical condition that wasn't. And I just remember there were so many elements to that call. And I think that whenever I had taken that call, this has been a little over a year ago. And I think maybe that call helped me deal with some of that in January, because it was just like trying to show that compassion to like his daughter and stuff. It was just like and that one too, that was like one of those moments where like it affected me, because I knew him. It was one of my friends I was on the phone with. And then one of my friends took the call, which also happened to be her ex. There was just like a lot of variables there. And like her kids, like it affected her kids so much. Like there was a lot that went on with that call. And that one was one that definitely, I mean, like we still talk, me and my friend, we still talk about that call, because it was just a very hard one to deal with. But
and I can see where it helped in a sense, because you knew all of them, and you've got this history and stuff. So anyone else, that call might have gone sideways, it's sideways to the point where there might not have been that level of compassion, because they didn't know the people involved in this, but with you being there and knowing them and have known them for a long time and stuff, you were able to give that level of compassion and comfort and everything that they needed during that time. So
Yeah,
I
it
can
was
see where it
and
correlates.
I just remember her like crying on the phone and her telling me, she's like, how am I going to tell my kids they don't have a dad? And I remember I was just like, because like my heart broke for them, because it's like, I know her kids. I was at the hospital when both her kids were born. Like, how do you? And then it's also like, that weird, like, I don't know. Sometimes I would imagine I'm not the only person that feels this way, but it's like that weird thing too, where you're like, I'm not technically as close to this situation as they are. And you almost feel guilty for being a little bit like upset about it. Like, okay, I'm going to let them have their moment. And so it was just like, that was something I struggled with too, because it was just like, do I have the right to be like, not the right to be upset, but like, is this something I should just be brushing off until it's time for me to leave and go, I can deal with it at home? Or is this something I need to deal with right now? I think that is for sure. I know it's something I've struggled with in my career. Like, at what point in time is there like, hey, I need to take a minute and deal with this right now? Or is it something I deal with at home? Like, cause I don't think any of us ever want to seem weak. And sometimes in our career, I feel like we're pushed to that, not pushed to that point, but we see all these other people that sometimes cut other people down. And I know, and honestly, a lot of new people do that. Like, a lot of people, why are you so affected by this? And it's like, I promise you'll start to understand whenever you start doing the job, how much these calls affect you. And sometimes they just pile on top of each other. Sometimes we'll have, full arrest on infants, more than one in a night. And you're like, why is this happening? Like, heaven forbid the same call taker gets that, in a row. It's just, so I think sometimes too, like, learning when to take that moment. Like, it's okay to take that moment. It doesn't mean you're weak. I think sometimes it means the exact opposite, because in our line of work, we don't want to admit that. Like,
I know exactly what you mean, because that's where I was as well, and I think it's good that that people question it and try to figure out when is the right time to do it versus burying it, because that's what I did in the beginning. I would bury it, and it piled on and piled on and made it worse and made it worse, and then finally it just kind of snapped, and it really not so much snapped. I broke because I didn't know how to deal with it. Luckily, I've always loved to write, so I started writing about all of these calls, and then talking about them, and it was at that point that it was therapeutic, and it was easier to handle a lot of this stuff because I was actually talking about it. But I was the same way. I didn't want to look weak. I didn't want people to be like, "Oh, Ricardo can't take it. He's probably going to be headed out soon," and that's not what it was. But I finally learned how to deal with it. Now, as we go into the wrap up of this episode, this has been awesome to have you on, and to have you share all of these stories and these important moments in your your career and your experience in 911. So here's the last question: if you could go back in time to talk to yourself in the beginning of your dispatch career with stuff that you've learned and experienced now, what would you tell yourself? What
you're gonna
advice would
mess
you give
up.
yourself?
You're gonna mess up.
Yeah.
Because I'm such a perfectionist, in like the littlest things that I mess up on, I sometimes beat myself up on. I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't do this. Like something as stupid as, like, the other day I took a phone call and it was for a medical, got the address, they asked for a suite number because it was in a big building. They said they didn't have one, but they gave me like directions on how to get there. And I remember I was like, okay. Like, I get all the information on the patient. Ambulance gets on scene. Ambulance is like, they're saying they don't have this patient here. Well, so when they did a callback, the callback number I had was the fax number. It wasn't theirs. And I remember I was so upset with myself because I didn't double check the phone number. It had came in on a landline hang up. And it's just like, and I would definitely tell myself, you're going to mess up, but it's going to be okay. Like, cause it's just like, you're not perfect. It's just like any job you do, you are going to mess up. You just have to do things to like the best of your ability. I was very fortunate that I had a trainer that told me that. And I remember he's just telling me that to make me not want to quit, because they really need people. Like, don't beat yourself up if you don't do that. But realistically, like, you are going to mess up there. And and I would probably tell myself too, there's going to be calls that affect you so differently. Things that you thought that you could handle, you can't, you need help. And there's going to be calls that you thought would tear you up and you did fine. Like, you handled them fine. Like, there's going to be I think you and I were talking about this, and I was like, I honestly think that it depends on the season of life you're in.
Mhm.
There could be things going on at home. And so something in that call reminds you of that, and it brings back a lot of emotions. And it's just, I would definitely tell myself like to prepare for that, because the littlest things will catch you off guard. Like a mom who's having trouble with their kid not breathing. That's something that, it affected me so much more when I was pregnant. And I think because I was just like, not that it doesn't affect me now, but just the it could have been my emotions running high too, because pregnant women,
Right.
but those calls affected me more than they do now. And I think there's, like I said, I think it has to do with your season of life, and it's okay if a certain call that seems like something as a low priority to somebody else, it's okay if that affects you differently than it affected this person. And in the same retrospect, if you see a coworker struggling with something, don't degrade their feelings. Don't be like, what are they, weak? Like, why are they dealing with this? Because I think that that's something too that sometimes, unfortunately, we do in dispatch is we sit there, we have no idea what's going on at their home. Like for the most part, we come in there, we work 12-hour shifts. And as much as we talk about our families and stuff, our actual personal lives, I feel like we tend to leave like on the back, like we don't talk about, because there's so much negativity going on in dispatch. And I think that that's just something that I would probably remind myself of.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for being on. I'm glad that we finally got a chance to do this.
Yes.
We hopefully we can do another episode, but let's not wait however long it's been to do the next one. This has been a lot of fun.
Sounds good.
I will be right back here with you in just a moment. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments or questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital, Rapid Deploy, as well as Carbine. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out and support us on Patreon. And that's patreon.com/WTT podcast. And there's a lot more bonus content coming up for that. Also, audio versions of the DRT, the Dispatchers Roundtable, as well as Open Mic, go to patrons only. So if you're looking for more of that, just make sure to check it out there on patreon.com/WTT podcast. This can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as Twitter, and it can be heard 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Also, one last thing. We just recently surpassed 1.6 million downloads. So thank you for everything. I appreciate it more than you know. And it continues. We'll see you in the next one.